Okay, so recording is up and running, so let me get my presentation up and running for you for today's session. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much then again, once again, for joining our next online session for FAC 2601, where we are dealing with different accounting standards, specifically then focusing on financial accounting for companies. So this is our next online session. Just by way of introduction, for those of you who haven't met me yet virtually, my name is Frank Montgomery. And I'm obviously then one of your lecturers for module FAC 2601. And it is my privilege and honor then to be with you for the next hour and a half presenting our next online class. Just again, the house rules. The session, as I've indicated, is recorded. So if there's anything that you want to revisit and go back again to, you will be able to get to that recording, which will be uploaded on your module site. Once again, if you have any questions, please just jot them down. And then at the end of the session, there will be an opportunity to ask those questions, and I will answer them in the Q&A session. Okay, as already indicated, the session will be made available. So for your advantage to go back again, if there's something that you've missed maybe, or then obviously to the advantage of those students that are unable to be with us this morning and to attend this live session, then the recording is there for the benefit of all students to revisit and review the whole session in its entirety. Okay, the lecturers by now you should be familiar with our module leader, Mr. Baloy, and then Mr. Isley, the other lecturer involved in our module. Our generic contact details, our email address, fac2601@unisa.ac.za, where you can get in touch with us with any queries or issues that you might have. There's also a message function on Moodle, or alternatively, you can go to our discussion forum on our module site and post anything that you require any assistance on that specific discussion forum. And we, as well as other students, can then engage actively in that discussion forum surrounding a specific topic or issue that might have been uploaded there. So for the purpose of today's session, it is our next accounting standard that we are dealing with, which is revenue. So that is our next lesson tool, which is lesson tool number 9. And as far as revenue is concerned, again, I'm going to follow the same approach as with my previous sessions. First, looking at the specific applicable accounting standard, dealing with the theory surrounding the standard, and then looking at the application by doing a few practical examples where we see how to apply the theory, which we will find then in the revenue accounting standard as covered in lesson tool number 9. Now, that applicable accounting standard for revenue is IFRS 15. Now, IFRS 15 deals specifically then with revenue stemming from contracts with customers. So that is the specific full name of the standard, revenue from contracts with customers. Now, in an overview, what the standard looks at is to report useful information, obviously surrounding revenue, regarding the nature of the revenue, what type of revenue are we reporting, the amount of the revenue to be reported, as well as the specific timing of when to report the revenue. And if revenue can't be reported, any uncertainty with regards to revenue or any cash flows, it will assist you then in dealing with all these issues to determine what is the nature of the type of revenue to be reported, at what amount should the revenue be reported, the timing to report the revenue, and if the revenue can't be reported, what is the uncertainty surrounding the revenue or any cash flows related to the revenue that we can't report on. And there is then sufficient guidance within our accounting standards IFRS 15 to deal with all these aspects. So, in terms of the standard, revenue is defined as income, income is defined in the conceptual framework as any increase in assets or alternatively a decrease in liabilities that will have the net effect of increasing our equity. Okay, remember your old accounting standard or equation that you already accounted in first year level accounting. So if there's any increase in assets or a decrease in liability with the net result of an increase in equity, it is defined as income, except if that increase in equity is a contribution made by your equity partners. So if your equity participants make any contribution to equity by, for example, buying shares in a company, then equity will increase, but that is then regarded as capital of nature and not seen as income because it did not result in an increase in asset or a decrease in a liability. So therefore, it won't be seen as any income as defined by the conceptual framework. So very important just to revisit this basic accounting equation formula to see what is a resulting equity. So it's increase in assets or a decrease in liability other than any contribution from equity participants. Okay, because as stated, this contribution will be seen as a capital increase in equity and therefore can't be defined and recognized as income. Now, IFRS 15 specifically looks then at the revenue component. It sees revenue as income arising in the course of an entity's ordinary activities. So if our entity, for example, is a manufacturing concern, it will manufacture and sell products. So the ordinary course of activities is to manufacture and sell products, and any income that derives through this process needs to be recognized, obviously, as revenue. You would have seen by now that this revenue component is disclosed as the very first line item on the face of the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income. So yes, we will still get to how and when and where and why to recognize revenue, but once it complete or meets the definition requirements in terms of the conceptual framework and IFRS 15, it needs to be disclosed as a first line item. So you will just see the line item revenue with an amount next to it. And that is then the basic total revenue in a specific accounting period arising from an entity's ordinary activities that it is basically operating in. This accounting standard, IFRS 15, determines when and how much revenue should be recognized. So it's very important to determine when it should be recognized, and once we've decided when it should be recognized, how much revenue should be recognized. Because obviously vitally important to disclose the correct revenue amount on your statement of profit or loss. Now, to assist with this, the standard has a basic 5-step revenue model. So to make it easy for us, there is 5 steps that you need to follow, which will then guide us in when to recognize the revenue. Once we've decided when, how much revenue should be recognized. Now, this 5-step revenue model consists of, first of all, to identify the contract. Is there a contract in place that will result in revenue for an entity? So that is the first step. Your second step is to identify the performance obligation within this contract. So what performance obligation needs to be satisfied as agreed upon in the contract to ensure revenue can be recognized? Okay, first two steps, identify the contract, identify the performance obligation within the contract that the entity needs to satisfy that will lead to revenue. The third step, obviously, is then to determine the transaction price. So once we've determined there's a contract, within that contract, we've got a performance obligation. Obviously, we need to determine at what value do we need to recognize the revenue. And that is where the third step will help us to determine what is the transaction price for this performance obligation within a contract. Once we've established this transaction price, it needs to be allocated to the specific performance obligation. Okay, depending on what the transaction price is and how much of that transaction price can we then allocate to the performance obligation agreed upon within a contract. And the final step then is obviously to then recognize this revenue. So each and every time that we are encountered with a situation to determine and disclose revenue, we will follow these 5 steps. Okay, so the 5 steps, first of all, identify if there's a contract, because if there's no contract, obviously it can't result in any revenue. Then we need to determine what is the performance obligations agreed upon in the contract. Once we've done that, determine what is the transaction price for this contract, then allocate this transaction price to the specific performance obligation, and finally, recognize the revenue as a single line item on the statement of profit or loss. So again, as you would have seen with all these accounting standards, there are some very important definitions given up front before you can go through the nitty-gritty within the specific standard. Now, we've already identified some of these steps, or the components within our 5 steps. The first of those being a contract, and by now you should know this is a straightforward agreement between at least 2 parties, because in order to be a contract, there needs to be more than one party involved. So it will be an agreement entered into between 2 or maybe more than 2 parties, which creates enforceable rights and obligations. So if we are a manufacturing concern and we are selling a product, there will be an agreement that we entered into between us and the buyer, so which creates enforceable rights and obligations. Our obligation is to provide the product to the buyer, and the enforceable right that we then have in terms of the contract is to receive compensation for our product from the buyer itself. So that is the first and foremost. Before we can start with recognizing revenue, there needs to be a contract where there's an agreement between at least 2 parties that creates enforceable rights and obligations. So out of this contract, there could then result a contract asset. So for our entity, it's the right to consideration. As I've said, if we are selling a product, we're entitled to the compensation. So within that contract, we create a contract asset for us. By selling a product to a buyer, so we are exchanging our goods or services to a customer, and in return, we're entitled to compensation. Therefore, we have a contract asset. Or the opposite of the coin, a contract liability, where we've now got the obligation to transfer to a customer goods or services for which the entity has already received consideration, or if the amount is due from the customer. So the contract asset and the contract liabilities are the flip side of the coins. The asset part is where we entitled to the compensation. The liability part is we still need to provide a service if we have already maybe received the compensation for that. So we received an order to manufacture a specific product for the customer. The customer has already paid us, so therefore we create a contract liability, in that we've got an agreement between the 2 parties where there is an obligation on our part to provide them with that specific product that they have ordered from us. The customer is a party that has contracted with an entity to obtain goods or services that are an output of the entities or the activities in exchange for consideration. So as we've said, straightforward, two parties to the contract. The one party is the entity, our company. The other party is the customer, where the customer basically buys from us based on the ordinary activities that we work in on a daily basis. And therein lies a contract and agreement with enforceable rights where we need to provide that product or service, and return the customer will provide us with a compensation. We've already looked at the definition of the income in terms of the standard. It will result in an increase in economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of inflows, in the form of cash that we will receive, or the enhancement of assets or decrease of liabilities. Remember, I said the income will result in an increase in assets or a decrease in liabilities. If we sold on credit, for example, it will result in the enhancement of our asset, where we create a debtor for the entity, for the customer that owes us the money. The net result is an increase in equity other than those relating to contributions from equity participants, as we've already identified the specific definition surrounding income. Within our 5 steps, we've also seen reference to a performance obligation. So this performance obligation is a promise within a contract between the two parties that we promise to the customer that we will transfer either a good or a service, or a bundle of goods or services that is distinct, or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. So it's basically our obligation depending on what the customer wants. Is it a single product that he orders? Is it a number of different products that he orders? Within the agreement and the contract with the customer, we need to identify what are our performance obligation or performance obligations for maybe a single service or a bundle of goods or services that is ordered by the customer. And based on those performance obligations, we need to determine the revenue to be recognized based on the contract entered into by the entity and its customer or customers. Okay, revenue, already touched on this as well. This is income arising in the course of the entity's ordinary activities. Already said, if we are a manufacturing concern, our ordinary activities is to manufacture and sell products. So based on the selling of these products, it will result in revenue for our entity. We've also identified that we need to determine the transaction price, basically in the revenue model. Now, this transaction price stems from, first of all, the standalone selling price of a good or service. Now, what is the standalone selling price? It is the price at which an entity would sell a promised good or service separate to a customer. So the product that we produces has a specific cost associated to it. To that, we will obviously add our profit margin and have a specific selling price in mind. That selling price is basically your standalone selling price, the value at which we sell our products to customers. And this then becomes your transaction price within our contract with a customer. So that is the total consideration to which we are entitled to inspect to once we exchange the product. So once we give the product to the customer, we expect him to pay that selling price that we are asking in terms of the contract that we entered into. Okay, just important to remember that this transaction price will exclude any amounts collected on behalf of third parties, for example, value-added tax. So yes, your total selling price is inclusive of VAT, but remember, VAT is collected on the part of SARS, and we need to refund that VAT amount to SARS We can't keep it for ourselves. We are collecting it on behalf of a third party, and as such, it does not meet the definition of revenue because it is not income arising in the course of the entity's ordinary activities. Our ordinary activity is to manufacture and sell the product, and on that selling price, excluding VAT, we can recognize as revenue because that is our transaction price and the compensation that we are entitled to based on the contract entered with our customer. So looking at the specific components of our 5-step model, what is considered to be a contract? As we already said, there needs to be an agreement between at least two parties, it can be more, that creates legal enforceable rights and obligations, meaning once you have signed or entered that contract, you are legally obliged and it can be enforced to comply with the contract requirements. These contracts can be a written or in an oral format and can be implied by the entity's customary business practices. So it's not necessary to be in a written format. It can also be in an oral format, an agreement between two or more parties that are legally enforceable and that you are bound by the arrangements within this contract. A contract does not exist, however, if each party to the contract, in other words, in our examples, the entity and a customer, has the unilateral enforceable right to terminate a wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party. So in this instance, if you feel that there is no performance and nothing coming from the contract, so you've entered the contract between the two parties, but there is the feeling that one of the parties is not performing, and this contract is terminated. A contract can be seen as wholly unperformed only if both of the following criteria are met. From our part, we have not yet transferred any goods or service to the customer. So there was agreement that we will transfer the goods or services, but we have not yet transferred these. And we have also not received and is not yet entitled to receive any consideration in return. So even though the agreement was there that creates its enforceable rights and obligations, based on the content of the contract and a long time span, nothing has happened, then it can be seen as a wholly unperformed if we've not yet transferred the goods and we've not received any payment yet. And then it can result in the termination of such a contract, meaning there will be no official contract in place. Only if both of these requirements are in place. So if goods has been transferred or if his money has been received, it won't be seen as a wholly unperformed criteria contract, and therefore it needs to it will fulfill the requirements of the first step of revenue. There will be a contract in place. So it's only if both of these are in place that it can be seen as not being a valid contract anymore. Any contract modification. So if you have already have a contract in place, but there needs to be a modification made to that contract, it will result in a separate contract. Again, if both of the following conditions are present. So if the scope of the contract increases because of the addition of promised goods or services that are distinct. So the customer has ordered 100 units. Initially, we entered into this contract agreement. Once that contract is in place, the customer decides that he actually needs double that, maybe 200 units. It will be seen as a contract modification, but we need to create a separate contract for these additional units. In addition to that, if the price of the contract increases by amount of consideration that reflects the entity's standalone selling prices of the additional promised goods or services, at any appropriate adjustments. So now that the customer wants more products, it is after the initial contract was signed. It might have been that we have now increased our prices due to taking into consideration the cost of producing units and inflation maybe. Now, in this instance, the standalone selling price has increased and is not the same as was in the original contract. So this will then result in a contract modification, and we need to create a separate contract for the new units at the new standalone selling price for those units. So once again, this contract modification will only come in place if the scope of the contract increases and the price of the contract increases. Then it will be seen as a contract modification, and we need to have a separate contract in place between the two parties. So that is as far as contract is concerned, the first step in the revenue model. The second is to identify the performance obligation. So this is done at contract inception. Once you have entered and signed that contract, or you've agreed to the contract terms and conditions, we need to assess the goods or services promised within this contract with a customer and identifying each performance obligation in terms of our responsibility to transfer to the customer either a good or service or a bundle of goods or services that is distinct, or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. So within this contract, we need to determine what is our performance or obligation. Is it to transfer a specific item or service, or a bundle of these goods or services that are distinct, or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same? And this needs to be determined immediately at contract inception. Now, a good or service that is promised to a customer is considered distinct if both of the following are met. The customer can benefit from the good or service either on their own or together with other resources that are readily available to the customer, and the entity's promise to transfer the good or service to the customer is separately identifiable from other promises in the contract. Now, to give you a practical example of this, if you buy a car, most instances, if you buy a new car, it might come with a service plan attached to that car. Or you can separately buy a service plan and add it to the purchase price. Now, in this instance, it means you can benefit from the good or service either own together with the other resources. So we've got two different performance obligations that we are dealing with. The one performance obligation is if you are selling the car, you need to provide the customer with a new car. That is the performance obligation. The service plan, if it's attached to the transaction price, yes, it is a service plan, but remember, it's a different performance obligation because the car you need to provide and make available to the customer once all the registration requirements have been completed. The service plan, however, stretches over a number of years, whether it be a 1-year service plan, a 2-year, a 3-year, or 4-year service plan. We've got a performance obligation where we need to service this vehicle of the customer in future. So they are separately identifiable, even though you can add the service plan to the transaction price. Both of these performance obligations have what we can identify separate standalone selling prices. You can attach a value to the vehicle and you can attach a value to the service plan as well. So this instance, you will have two performance obligations within the same contract, the one being the vehicle with each standalone selling price, the value at which you are selling the vehicle. And then secondly, you will have the service plan attached to this vehicle, which you can also sell separately to clients. Like I said, it can be incorporated within the selling price, but you still need to separate these as two different performance obligations because the car needs to be made available immediately. The service plan will run over a number of years. So, depending on the contract, the promised goods or services may include but are not limited to. So they provide us with a scenario or examples of different performance obligations in terms of IFRS 15. It can be the sale of goods produced by an entity. So that will be our inventory that we are selling off to the customer. It can be the resale of goods purchased by an entity, the merchandise of a retailer that it sells off. It can be the resale of rights to goods or services purchased by an entity, where we are an agent where a ticket is resold acting as a principal. It can be that we are performing a contractually agreed upon task or task for a customer. So within this contract, we need to perform a specific task that the customer wants in terms of a specific contract that's been set up. It can be that we are providing a service of being ready to provide goods or services on unspecified, it can be, in the form of unspecified updates to software that provided on a when if available basis. Okay, where we are in the IT business and we provide updates to software at certain times in future when it is required to do these updates. So this is a service that we need to be ready for when it becomes due time to provide that service. It can be that we are providing a service of arranging for another party to transfer goods or service to a customer, acting as an agent of another party. It can be that we are granting rights to goods or services to provide it in future, which a customer can resell or provide to its customer. Okay, where we have, for example, an entity selling a product to a retailer, promises to transfer an additional good or service to an individual who purchases product from the retailer. That is a performance obligation that we need to comply with. If we are constructing or manufacturing or developing an asset on behalf of a customer, if we are granting licenses, that is our performance obligation to grant those licenses. Okay, or if we're granting options to purchase additional goods or services, when those options provide the customer with a material right. Once you've granted those options, it becomes a performance obligation within the contract entered into with the customer. So these are just some of examples of what can be seen as a performance obligation depending on the type of entity that we are dealing with. So based on the entity and the contract that is entered within the customer, any of these will result in a performance obligation, which is contractually enforceable by right and law. The third part of our definition is our transaction price. Now, this is basically the amount of consideration to which an entity expects to be entitled to in terms of its contract and its customary business practices in exchange for transferring our goods or service to a customer, and as I've already identified, excluding amounts collected on behalf of third parties such as that. Now, this consideration promised in a contract with a customer may include fixed amounts, variable amounts, or both of these. So it might be that the amount is fixed. I mean, if we produce a product and we sell it today, that is the fixed amount that you need to pay. The variable amount is where we provide a service to a customer over a number of years. So we've entered a contract, for example, we're in the cleaning business, we offer cleaning services, and we enter into a 3-year contract. For each and every following year, obviously as things and cost increases, the value of the service or the transaction price of our service will increase. We might just adjust it for inflation each year. So within that 3-year contract, we will have a variable price, a price for year 1, a price for year 2, and a price for year 3. Therefore, there can be, as I've said, variable amount included in the total transaction price. Now, important is the nature, timing, and amount of the consideration promised by a customer will affect the estimate of the transaction price of an entity considers, and all of the following needs to be taken into account, whether we are dealing with fixed amounts or variable amounts. If the consideration promised includes a variable amount, an entity will estimate and update this estimate at the end of each reporting period, the amount of consideration to which the entity will be entitled in exchange for transferring the promised good or service to a customer. Now, as I've said, the variable amount can be due to the example that I used, in that we are offering a cleaning service over a 3-year period that we adjust for inflation. Or the consideration value can vary because of discounts that are offered, rebates that comes into place, refunds for returned products, credits given to us, price concessions, any incentives, any performance bonuses or penalties, or any other similar items. Because the entity's entitlement to the consideration is contingent on the occurrence of non-occurrence of a future event. So the transaction price made or agreed upon is dependent on any of these that might happen in future. Therefore, it is seen as variable because future discount, rebates, refunds, whatever the case might be, will have an impact on the amount to be recognized as revenue. And therefore, at each and every year, we need to update the estimate of this variable. Did the discount come through in the current year, or will it still come through? Did we have any refunds? And therefore, update our estimate of total revenue recognized based on what has happened in a specific accounting period. We also need to update the transaction price for the effect of time value of money if there is a timing issue of payments agreed to by the parties to the contract, either explicitly or implicitly. So if we buy something from a customer, but we don't immediately pay the full price for the product, so there's extended credit terms agreed upon, then we also need to consider the time value of money to determine the actual transaction price to be recognized as revenue. Okay, so it is very important to see if the customer or the entity is provided with a significant benefit of financing the transfer of goods or service to the customer. Now, what is a significant benefit? As I've said, is extended payment terms. So buying a product today, but giving you 3 or 6 months to settle the full amount. That might be seen as a significant benefit, but now the question remains, what and how much and when do we need to recognize the revenue regarding this transaction? So the whole objective of this adjustment is for an entity to recognize the revenue at the amount that reflects the price that the customer would have paid for the promised good or services if the customer had paid cash on the date of the transaction. So that is an important issue with revenue. If time value of money is concerned, is to determine what is the amount that would have been paid, because that is the amount that will initially be recognized as your revenue amount. And we will go through a practical example in this regard just to explain the whole process that you need to follow through in determining the transaction price or the revenue associated with the transaction price, and what we need to recognize initially and what we need to recognize as revenue in the future. Now, an entity needs to consider all the relevant facts and circumstances in assessing whether a contract contains a significant finance component, including both of the following. The difference, if any, between the amount of promised consideration and the cash selling price of the promised goods, as well as the combined effect of both the expected length of time between transferring the promised good or service to the customer and payment and the prevailing interest rate in the relevant market. So basically, what we are dealing with here is a time value of money issue. So we sell a product today, it has a specific cash selling price. We do allow extended credit terms in that repayment can only be in 6 months' time. The repayment that will be in 6 months' time will obviously increase interest that is added to the selling price. So there will be then a difference between the promised consideration that you will pay in 6 months and what the cash selling price will be, based on the length of time to make repayment and the obvious interest rate agreed upon. And therefore, this will have an impact on how we recognize the revenue, how much revenue do we recognize, and when to recognize the revenue. Okay, but we'll get to a practical example on this. The transaction price for contracts in which a customer promises consideration in a form or other than cash. So in most instances, when you enter into an agreement and a contract with a customer, it is that he will pay cash either immediately or in terms of the credit terms that we agreed upon. You might find, however, that a customer wants to exchange rather something for our product other than cash. So then we need to determine what will the transaction price be to be recognized as revenue. And in this instance, we need to determine then the fair value of the product that is offered in return. The fair value will be the standalone selling price of the product offered. If you can't determine that, if you can't reasonably estimate the fair value, if you can't find a standalone selling price of this non-cash consideration, we will need to measure this consideration indirectly by referencing to the standalone selling price of the goods or services promised to the customer in exchange for the consideration. Okay. So then we deem it to be the same value of our standalone selling price offered with regards to the exchange of goods. Once you have established what the actual transaction price is, it needs to be allocated to your performance obligation. Now, the standalone selling price of the distinct good or service underlying each performance obligation in the contract is determined, as we've already identified, at contract inception, and the transaction price is then allocated in proportion to those standalone selling prices. As we've already said, that standalone selling price is a price at which an entity would sell its product or service. So you've got a set price that you want for a specific product or service. That is your standalone selling price, and that is the transaction price that will be allocated to the specific performance obligation. If that standalone selling price is not directly observable, an entity will estimate the standalone selling price by considering all relevant information, the market conditions currently, entity-specific factors, and the information about the customer or class of customer that is reasonably available to the entity. But in most instances, this won't be necessary because that standalone selling price will be observable, because obviously if you are a manufacturing concern that are manufacturing and producing products to sell, you have a specific selling price in mind based on your construction cost and your profit margins. So these are in unique situations where it's not possible to have a standalone selling price available. If a customer receives a discount for purchasing a bundle of goods or services, This will be based on the sum of the standalone selling prices of those goods or services if it exceeds the contract value. So that will be based on basically what is the contract value in total. And if the sum of those standalone selling prices of goods or services in the contract exceeds the promised consideration in the contract, there will be a discount. Okay, so if you are selling products and in total the sum of those standalone selling prices is 10,000, but the contract determines that the consideration to be paid is 9,000. It means there is a discount to be received by the customer. Now that discount needs then to be allocated to the transaction price. Depending on how the transaction was set up, the entire discount can be allocated then to one performance obligation within the contract, or if it's not possible to identify which performance obligation is entitled to the entire discount, it can be done proportionally to all the performance obligations within the contract. So depending on how the contract was set up, if this discount only applies to one specific performance obligation, then obviously the total discount needs to be allocated to that performance obligation. If it's not possible, then it is allocated the total discount to in proportional format to all the performance obligations within the contract. Okay, and this proportionate allocation of the discount is a result of the entity allocating the transaction price to each performance obligation on the basis of the relative standalone selling prices of the underlying distinct good or services. So they will look at the standalone selling prices of all the performance obligations, and in that ratio, allocate the discount to those standalone selling prices. So if you've got two performance obligations, the one with a standalone selling price of 2,000 and the other one with a standalone selling price of 1,000, then the allocation of the discount will be calculated in proportion to the ratio between the two being 2:1, or basically then 2/3 to the one performance obligation and 1/3 of the discount goes to the other performance obligation in a proportionate format. The same applies if there's variable consideration that is promised within the contract. It might be attributable to the entire contract or to a specific part of the contract, meaning that allocation of the transaction price based on the variable consideration can go either to the entire contract, one performance obligation, or it needs to go to a specific performance obligation. For example, one or more, but not all performance obligations in the contract. If there's a bonus, the bonus might be contingent on an entity transferring a promised good or service within a specified period. So then this variable consideration will only go to that specific part that promises the bonus. Or one or more, but not all distinct good or services promised in a series of distinct good or services that form part of a single performance obligation. This other example that I've used. The consideration promised for the second year of a 2-year cleaning service contract will increase based on inflation movements. So that cleaning service variable amount is based on a specific part of the contract, the cleaning service only. Therefore, the variable consideration needs to go specifically to that performance obligation only. So in both instances, with regards to transaction price, within the terms of the contract, determine what part of the performance obligation does it apply to. Does it apply in its entirety to all the performance obligation? Then the allocation is done in a apportionate manner. If it only is applicable to a specific performance obligation, then obviously the transaction price is only allocated and affected on that specific performance obligation. After the contract inception, the transaction price may change for various reasons, as we've already said. Due to rebates, refunds, discounts, whatever the case might be. An entity will allocate to the performance obligation in the contract any subsequent changes in the transaction price on the same basis as at contract inception. So you don't reallocate the transaction price to reflect changes in the standalone selling prices after contract inceptions. So initially, on inception of the contract, there will be a transaction price. If it fulfills all the requirements of the 5-step model, that is recognized as revenue. After the contract inception, if that transaction price then changes, the amounts allocated to a satisfied performance obligation are recognized as revenue or as a reduction of revenue in the period in which the transaction price changes. So you won't go and change the revenue already recognized. It will be updated by increasing or decreasing or reducing the revenue in a specific accounting period in which the transaction price changed. Okay, so just repeat this again. Initially, on inception, recognize the revenue. If the transaction price changes in the next year on the same contract, revenue has already been recognized as a satisfied performance obligation. Now, this increase or reduction in the transaction price will then just be used to update the revenue already recognized with these transaction price changes that has taken place. So you just update revenue based on transaction price changes that has taken place. Regarding the satisfaction of the performance obligation. So this is now to determine when to recognize revenue. When does an entity satisfy a performance obligation? By transferring the promised good or services, the asset, to the customer. Now, an asset is deemed to be transferred to a customer when the customer obtains control of that asset. So for each performance obligation identified, an entity determines at contract inception whether it satisfies the performance obligation over time or at a point in time. If it does not satisfy a performance obligation over time, the performance obligation is satisfied at a point in time. So with regards to revenue, we will need to determine, is revenue recognized over time or at a specific point in time? Now, goods and services are assets, obviously, even if only momentarily, when they are received and used. The control of an asset refers to the ability to direct the use of and obtain substantially all the remaining benefits from the assets. Now, this control includes the ability to prevent other entities from directing the use of and obtaining the benefits from an asset. Now, the benefits of an asset are potential cash flows, inflows, or savings and outflows that can be obtained directly or indirectly. So if you use the asset to produce goods or provide services, including public services, we will receive cash inflows. If you are using the asset to enhance the value of other assets, it will result in cash flows. If you are using the asset to settle liabilities or reduce expenses, if we are selling or exchanging the asset, pledging the asset to secure a loan, it means we've got the ability to direct the use of and obtain all the benefits from that specific asset. An entity is considered to transfer the control of good or service over time and therefore satisfies a performance obligation and recognizes revenue over time if one of the following criteria is met. The entity simultaneously receives and consumes the benefits provided by the entity's performance as the entity performs, or the entity's performance creates or enhances an asset, work in progress that the customer controls as the asset is created or enhanced, or the entity performance does not create an asset with an alternative use to the entity, and the entity has an enforceable right to payment for performance completed up to date. So this is then considered to be revenue that we recognized over time, the satisfaction that takes place over time. With regards to this revenue, the recognition can be produced, or the recognition can be recognized basically by looking at two components or two methods allowed. Looking at the measure of progress, you can either use an output method or an input method. The output method will result in revenue recognition based on goods or services produced up to date. Okay, so this method considers the results of appraisals or milestones reached or units produced. So over time means that you will recognize the revenue based on the number of units already produced. So if you have offered to produce and provide the customer with 1,000 units, and at the end of the year you've produced 500, it will mean that revenue recognition over time on the output method will result in revenue on 500 units to be recognized. Or you can use the input method. Here, revenue recognition is based upon the entity's efforts or input. So this method considers the resources consumed, labor hours expensed, cost incurred, or time lapsed. So on the input method, we look directly at the entity itself to see how much cost has it incurred. So there will be an estimate initially in terms of the contract of how much it will produce to manufacture a product. Based on the cost expensed in a specific accounting period, we will then apportionate that as our revenue over time. If this performance obligation is not considered to be satisfied over time, an entity satisfies a performance obligation at a specific point in time. To determine this point in time at which a customer will contain control of a promised asset and the entity satisfies a performance obligation, the entity needs to consider the requirements for control and the indicators of transfer of control, which can include the following. The entity has a present right to payment for the asset. Okay, so we've got a right in terms of a contract is enforceable to receive payment for the asset. And therefore it can be seen as a point in time that we reach that we have control. The customer has a legal title to the asset. So at that point in time, we've already the legal title to the asset, and therefore the satisfaction of the performance obligation based at a point in time can be recognized. The entity has already transferred the physical position of the asset. So even though payment has not yet taken place, the transfer has taken place. The customer then has a significant risk and rewards of ownership of the asset because they can direct and control the use of the asset. The customer has accepted the asset. Again, it will be at a point in time that we then can recognize revenue. And those are the two satisfaction requirements for performance obligation at a point in time or over time, depending on which one is chosen by an entity. And that brings us to the end of our theory part. So with regards to revenue, basically following the 5-step model to identify the contract between the two parties, then looking at the performance obligations within that contract, determining the transaction price, allocating that to the performance obligation, and then finally recognizing the revenue. So let's look at a few practical examples with regards to revenue recognition. So in question 1, we've got Lipton, which is a tea or a coffee manufacturer. It sells a coffee machine for 150,000. So that is the standalone selling price. It is sold on credit on the condition the amount must be settled by 28 February 2020, which is 2 years later. The financing component is considered significant, and the incremental borrowing rate is 9% per annum, while the customer's credit risk is 15% per annum. Prepare the journal entries. So now we need to determine, can we recognize revenue? How do we recognize revenue? When do we recognize revenue? So we would assume that I've entered here into a contract for this machine. So there is enforceable rights. So we've got a contract in place. The performance obligation is that need to provide the coffee machine to them, and return, we are entitled to the payment to be received. So there's a performance obligation. The transaction price is the standalone selling price. The only problem here is we need to consider and bring in consideration the time value of money now, because the standalone selling price will be different from the total receivable amount recovered on this transaction due to interest being involved in this transaction. So first of all, at date of inception of the contract, when the contract was entered into and 1 March 2018, seeing that the financing component is considered to be significant, we need to base our calculation using the customer credit risk. So that time value is then considered or calculated basing that credit risk of 15%. And your period is 2 years because the extended payment terms given is 2 years. The 15% is our interest rate. There is a zero payment in the 2 years. The future value is 150,000. That is the standalone selling price that needs to be settled. But this will now be only after 2 years. We need to determine what is the revenue that can be recognized immediately at inception, and that is why we calculate the present value on 1 March 2018, which is 113,421. So the total finance component that is added to be recognized over 2 years is the difference between the standalone selling price and the present value at date of inception of the contract, which works out to 36,578. So on the 1st of March, we will immediately recognize revenue, the present value of the standalone selling price, which is 113,000. Now that is immediately recognized as revenue. You can't recognize the full 150,000 because it has not yet been received. So we adjust the value for the time value of money based on the circumstances surrounding the transaction. Then at the end of the current year, on 28 February, we will recognize finance income being 15% on the outstanding balance of 113, the present value recognized as revenue. And now we'll recognize as our finance income as a separate part of our revenue, the interest on the outstanding amount. And we'll do the same at the end of the second year, when now the total value on which the interest is calculated will be the initial amount recognized plus a 17,000 interest for the previous year. In total, the outstanding value sits now at about 130,000. 15% on that will give us 19,000 that goes to trade receivables and 19,000 recorded as finance income. And then when the settlement takes place, you will receive the 115,000 as the cash flow, and trade receivables will be written out and the account closed off as the total 150,000 has been accounted for. So basically, what we did in this transaction is determining the revenue to be recognized at inception, which is 113,000, the present value, and then over the 2-year period, recognize the additional revenue as we earn the finance income, the interest part on this transaction, the 17 and the 19,000 respectively. And then if you add all of this 113 plus the 17 plus the 19, we'll get to the 150,000, which is the total component that we will receive at the end of the 2-year period. Okay, moving to the second example. Bugatti enters into agreement with Mike for the sale of their latest SUV, along with a 4-year service plan for a total of 900,000. So the total price for the car and the incorporation of the 4-year service plan is 900,000. Any client may also acquire the exact same vehicle without the service plan at a standalone selling price of 860,000. So you are giving the option of only buying the car without a service plan. But Bugatti also regularly sells as an add-on this 4-year service plan to the customers for 60,000. So you can see that we've got both of these with separate standalone selling prices. The sale took place on 1 March 2018. With a February year end, Bugatti has a gross profit percentage of 25%. We need to discuss and journalize the above transactions, the accounting records of Bugatti, obviously in terms of IFRS 15. So again, the first revenue model step, we've got an agreement in place. The second is we need to identify the performance obligations. The performance obligations is we need to provide Mike with a car, and we need to provide him with services over the next 4 years. These are two separate performance obligations because they have got separate standalone selling prices. So those are the transaction prices for both of these performance obligations. Now we need to allocate these transaction prices in order to determine what is the revenue to be recognized. So Bugatti is required to deliver a vehicle and a service plan. It is a single contract for both these items. It is negotiated as a package and has a single commercial objective, obviously. The performance obligations are the goods and services distinct. Yes, we have got a car and we've got a service plan, which are separately identifiable. They are not interrelated and independent. Even though they are sold together as a one package, they can be sold separately. So you have the option to only take the car without the service plan. If at a later stage you want to add the service plan, you can buy it separately. Therefore, they are both considered to be distinct services and products, and we've got two obligations. So we will need to account for them separately as far as revenue is concerned. And we need to allocate this total consideration that we receive based on the best estimate standalone selling price of each. So the total consideration that we receive is 900,000. This needs to be allocated based on the standalone selling prices of each items individually. So we've got the Bugatti, we've got the service plan. The Bugatti has got a selling price of 860. It's got a service plan if sold separately for 920,000. So if you take the separate standalone selling prices, it adds up to 920,000. Apportioned between the vehicle and the service plan, the selling price of the Bugatti is 860 over 920,000, effectively a rate or ratio of 93.48%. So 93.48% is then allocated of the total transaction price of 900,000 for the Bugatti. The service plan accounts for 60,000 over 920,000 or 6.5%. And we will allocate for the total consideration of 900,000, 6.5% towards the service plan itself. And this is the allocation of the total 900,000, combining the car and the service plan separately. So on the date of the inception of the contract, we will recognize as revenue the total amount of 900,000, or not as revenue, but we will recognize a cash flow of 900,000 received for the car and the service plan. As revenue, we can only recognize the 841,000 because that is the portion allocated to the car, the Bugatti itself. And when you deliver the Bugatti to the client, it means we have satisfied that performance obligation already, and we can recognize the revenue. However, we've also received the income for the service plan. It can't be recognized yet as revenue, so we receive income received in advance in total for the service plan. Excuse me. Why? Because the service plan obligation will only be satisfied in future, as and when we deliver the services. So in date of inception, we only recognize the total revenue on the car, and we will recognize income received in advance of 58,000 for the service plan. This is just the inventory going out and recognize the cost of sale based on our profit percentage of 25%. So our cost of sales on the transaction is 675,000. And then for the 4 subsequent years, we will recognize a portion of the income received in advance that will now translate into revenue. 14,670 Rand for each and every of the 4 years that will go by. Okay, so again here, the 2 different performance obligations have got their own standalone selling prices. So we can apportion it based on that towards the total transaction price of 900,000. 93% related to the car recognized immediately as revenue, and 6.5% for the service plan only recognized as revenue over the 4-year period as and when we deliver the actual service to provide the service on the vehicle. Hence, initially, total recognition of the revenue related to the car, recognizing a liability and income received in advance of 58,680, which will then, as I've said, translate into revenue over the 4 years that will follow when we provide this service. Okay, our final question that we'll look at as far as practical is more a discussion type of question. We've got Hilo, which is a software developer, enters into a contract with Flow Limited to transfer a software license, perform an installation service, and provide unspecified software updates and technical support, online and telephonic support for a 2-year period. Hilo sells the license, installation service, and technical support separately. The installation service includes changing the web screen for each type of user, and the installation service is routinely performed by other entities and it does not significantly modify the software. The software remains functional without the updates and the technical support. Now, from us is required to discuss whether the goods or services promised in the contract by Hilo to Flow are distinct, and then clearly indicate the performance obligations you identify in the contract based on the distinct promise discussion. So based on the information provided to us, Hilo will assess the goods and services promised to Flow Limited, determine which goods and services are distinct. We observe from Hilo's point of view that the software is delivered before the other goods and services, and that it remains functional without the updates and the technical support. So Flow Limited can benefit from the updates together with the software licenses transferred right at the start of the contract. Therefore, we can conclude from Hilo Limited's perspective that Flow Limited can benefit from each of the goods and services, either on their own or together with the other goods and services that are readily available. So it's not interrelated and interdependent on each other. Hilo will also consider the factors in IFRS 15 and determine that the promise to transfer each good and service to Flow Limited is separately identifiable from each of the other promises. So, although it integrates the software into the customer system, the installation service does not significantly modify or customize the software itself. And as such, we can say that the software in the installation service does not significantly affect Flow Limited's ability to use and benefit from the software license, because this installation services are routine and it can actually be obtained from alternative or other service providers. We further observe that none of the promised goods or services significantly modify or customize one another. nor are High-Low Limited providing a significant service of integrating the software and services into a combined output. We can then finally conclude that the software and the services do not significantly affect each other and therefore are not highly independent or highly interrelated, because High-Low Limited would be able to fulfill its promise to transfer the initial software license independently from its promise to subsequently provide installation service, software updates, or the technical support. Hence, what it basically means is, based on this assessment, we can identify 4 separate performance obligations. The first is to provide a software license. The second is the installation service. The third is the software updates in future. And the fourth is the technical support if and when it is required. And that is my presentation on revenue for today, looking at the standard itself, and then looking at a few practical examples with regards to when, how, and where to recognize revenue or not to recognize revenue based on the 5-step model for revenue. So I will just close down my presentation. Thank you for your attendance, and then I will have a look at any questions that might come through in the Q&A section. Okay, so let's give it 10 minutes or so for any questions that you might have. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A section, and I will address those for you. Okay, so just looking through here, the questions. Okay, the first one that I can see coming through, is a final exam going to be a multiple choice exam or handwritten? It's definitely going to be a handwritten exam. There might be a few multiple choice questions incorporated in there, but the majority will be in the form of a assessment like you had in assessment number 2. Again, you won't be able to type it. It needs to be handwritten in full. Okay, when will the result for assessment 2 be made available? So we are still in the progress of marking, hopefully aiming to have the marking completed by the weekend, and then the results should be released through the course of next week. Obviously, getting it out before the final exam date, so that you can have your assessment marks and your final year mark. Okay, how do we calculate the standalone selling prices and the allocation to the performance obligation when we were told the total consideration of the vehicle and service plan is 920,000, but we're not given the standalone selling prices for the vehicle and the service plan? So normally in this scenario, I mean, if you are in the business of selling a car, then those standalone selling prices should be available for the vehicle and the service plan. If it is not given, once again, you'll have to look at the market considerations by looking at similar industries, people selling similar sort of cars and service plans, and based on that information, determine what the standalone selling prices would be for the different performance obligations. But I mean, if you are in the industry of selling cars, you've got a fixed value attached to that specific vehicle. You've got a specific value attached to the service plan. So those standalone selling prices of the 2 different components should be readily available. So in an exam scenario situation, this will normally be given, or it will give you an estimate of the value of those items in a similar industry in order for you to make a fair value a judgment and have specific values attached to the 2 different performance obligations. I hope that answers your question there. Let's just see any new questions. Okay, when doing time value of money calculations, what is the level of rounding allowed? Because I've done examples and then I get them answers sometimes differ significantly because of rounding on some of the amounts or percentages. Okay, yes, with time value of money, depending on your financial calculator that you use. So normally there will be rounding issues, but it shouldn't be significant in the form of hundreds or thousands differences. So yes, there is an allocation that is made and provision that is made for rounding off to ensure that is not strictly looking at the specific value in terms of the memo, but due to the rounding off, yes, it will be considered and provision made for in the calculations. But like I said, it really shouldn't be that there is such a big difference in rounding off. It will be a matter of a few rands this way or that way. Again, not related today. When will the results of assessment 2 be available? As I've already answered that one, we are still busy with the marking, hoping to complete by the weekend, and then through the course of next week, those results will be released. Okay, will there be a session for exam prep where a paper will be worked out? Unfortunately, with regards to our module, we were on continuous assessments for the previous 2 years. So there is not a paper that is similar to the one that you can expect right at the beginning or at the end of this year. So unfortunately, no, there isn't a paper that we can work through, but we have provided you with some past papers and exam preparation in exam or in the lesson tool number 12 that you can have a look at. So you can have a look at those, work through those, and then obviously in preparation for the exam, as a basis, use assessment 2 because that is the type of questions and format that you can expect. And then also obviously work through all the different lesson tools and all the videos and online sessions that you had in order to properly prepare you for the exam. Okay, hello, I'm a supplementary student, do not have access to recorded videos. How can I access them? Okay, so there, if you just go to your announcements, you would have seen that there's a YouTube channel that was created for the supplementary students. So just go to that link and all the videos are uploaded on that YouTube channel. I don't see any new questions as of yet. Give it another 5 minutes. Any questions that you still might have, feel free to pop them in that Q&A section. Just maybe further commenting on preparation for the exam. I am sure that all of you are allocated to e-tutors, and some of those e-tutors also have sessions where they basically look at old and past questions and stuff like that that they work through. So maybe attend all those sessions as well, as those will definitely be beneficial in your preparation for the exam. As far as exam preparation is concerned, what we are maybe considering at this point in time is to have a session, but not actually working through a past paper or a previous paper. As I've explained, that is not really available at this stage, but just to advise you and prepare you on the technical aspects to make sure that you are ready for the exam and ensure what is expected in terms of the uploading of the exam paper and the compliance of the proctoring tool, because that is extremely important to ensure a successful submission takes place with regards to the exam and the requirements. So that is an exam prep session that we will maybe still consider to have with you. Yes, so maybe have a look out for an announcement in that regard. I don't see any new questions as of yet. We've got give it another 4 minutes. more than welcome to drop any questions then in that Q&A section for me. They're still monitoring the Q&A section. No new questions as of yet. We still have 3 minutes remaining in our session. So any pressing questions that you might still have, you can pop them in there. If you don't get your question in today, you're more than welcome to send it through to our mailbox, fac2601@uniso.ac.za, and we will attend to those questions right there. But yeah, still time, another 2 minutes now remaining for any questions that you might have on the session today, or maybe something in general that you need to find out regarding module FAC 2601. Nothing as yet, no new questions in the Q&A session. Final minute to drop anything in there, any question that you might still have. Please feel free to drop it there, and I can quickly still address that before we close off our session. Okay, for the supplementary students trying to access the YouTube link, that YouTube link is definitely up and working. If there is an issue, please feel free then just to, on the first semester site, you can drop your question or issue there, or saying that you can't access it. We'll provide you again with the link on the discussion forum, or you can just send an email to us, and we will then assist you with the link. But that link is definitely up and running. There's no issues with that. Okay, I think that is 11 o'clock now on my side. I don't see any new questions coming through. But as I've indicated, you're more than welcome. If you still have any questions on this lesson or this online class, to send it to our email address or engage in the discussion forum. Get in touch with us. But then that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you for your attendance. I hope it was worth your while. Have a fantastic day further until we again meet in virtual space. Keep well, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.